This week I'm down in Essex exploring the Blackwater. Now, Essex takes a lot of stick one way and another, doesn't it? But do you know, the Blackwater slowly making its way towards the sea, well, I reckon that's one of the true joys in life. Crack of dawn, Malden. I'm in bed. That's my stunt double doing the daybreak cycling sequence along the quayside and past those 19th century juggernauts, the East Coast barges. And on to our first mystery, one that concerns some clapboarded buildings and a small patch of grass. Well, there's two mysteries. One's going to be your next riddle, but the first mystery is they laid it in the early 1900s. Nobody seems to know how they did it. Did they seed it with grass seed, or did they think, no, that'll take ages to grow, sod it? All right, please yourself. Anyway, the riddle. Why do you think a big area like this, which had previously been a dirty, dusty coal yard, why do you think the new owners, who were tailors, why do you think they needed a big grass area to work on? Very tasteful interior. I rather like the way they've tented the walls with canvas. That must have cost a bit, you know. Mind you, perhaps there was a sale on at the time. Oh, come on, how many clues do you want here? Now, this beautiful building, right on the banks of the Blackwater, was perfectly placed for unloading those great barges. It was, you might say, in a key position. Ooh. Now, in 1925, the lease was sold to Arthur Taylor. Taylor, you see, ran a sail-making business, and in this shed, he carried out the restoration and repair and dressing of barge sails. And ever after, it's been known as the Sail Loft. Well, in time, the Taylors became the sail-making family in the whole of this part of the world. Their sails were in huge demand, and the lawn was planted at the beginning of the last century in order to provide a work floor, a place where they could work on the canvas and prepare it for use on the sea. And to this day, they still do that, although they don't do it on the lawn anymore. But every February, if you come here, you can see them down on the quayside, working up the sails for the great East Coast barges. Now, back on the quayside, the skipper and the crew of the barge Xylonite can't wait to teach me the ancient art of sail dressing. A traditionally messy business, involving overalls, boots and pushing a broom about.
So this is the mizzen, Bryan. This is the mizzen sail off the barge, the little one that goes at the back when you see us sailing.
I'm glad about that. We stopped the little one first.
I'm giving you the best broom, you know.
Well, I thought you'd give me the worst one. This holds more. I've got to work harder. So why do they do this?
Well, this is a preservative, and it dries off to a lovely, soft, waxy finish, which protects the sail from chafing. You get a lot of chafing on a Thames barge. So you get ropes running across the sail, and if you don't do this, eventually they chafe through. If you do this every year or two, it protects the sail and prolongs the life of it. And it makes them look nice too.
So what was it they used to use sort of 100, 150 years ago?
Well, actually up until, I suppose really up until about 20, 30 years ago, you couldn't get the stuff in the tins. You used to mix your own. And they used to use a mixture of fish oil and red ochre, which is where the red colour comes from, this lovely rich traditional red colour. Because
ochre's a type of, is it a dried mud, have I got that right?
Yeah, it comes as a powder, and you mix it up in a bit of seawater to form a paste, and then mix fish oil in with it. And the fish oil, of course, never really dries, so you're getting the same kind of protection from that.
I was going to say, if the fish oil never dries, that must make the sails pretty bad to handle.
If you've got fish oil on there, of course, you end up a bit fishy as well, I suppose.
Do you remember a few years back, that Queen song, Fat-Bottomed Girls? Well, that always reminds me of a rather special lady of my acquaintance, Susie. Now, Susie's the same age as me, and, well, not as narrow in the waist as some of the younger lads seem to like him. In fact, much like myself, a bit broad in the beam. Well, I tell you, she's got a bottom to die for. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da. Oh, sorry. So here's your next riddle to be thinking about whilst I bounce the barge off the banks of the canal and reduce the poor owner to tears. Just who is this fat-bottomed girl called Susie? And no, you didn't mishear me, this is a canal. The Grand Union isn't the only one in the region, you know. This is the Chelmer and Blackwater navigation. Never heard of it, have you? Don't worry, neither had I. Do you know, it's really quite astonishing. You've got 14 miles of quite beautiful canalised river running through the middle of the Essex heartlands. And yeah, I bet most of the people living down here just don't even know it's here. Except the 100 or so boats that are on the river, but they're keeping it to themselves. A day like this though, can't say I blame them really. This is gorgeous. Now, this Cinderella Canal was built in the 1790s. The idea was to make an easy and direct route from the Heybridge Basin up to Chelmsford. The problem was, it was planned to completely cut out the Port of Malden. As you can imagine, that went down like the Titanic with the people in the town.
They in fact had a great deal of difficulty getting it through Parliament because there was quite a lot of opposition from the millers who were frightened of losing water, and also the burgesses of Malden who could see that a lot of the trade that was coming through to them...
They'd lose all their port fees, wouldn't they?
They'd lose the port fees.
John Rennie, a well-known, well-respected canal architect, undertook the project, and the canal was up and running in just 4 years. In the early days, the barges were crewed by just 2 men, a steersman at the tiller and the other leading the horse. The barges were loaded up at Collier's Reach. From there, it made its way to Chelmsford. But you see, the problem was the barges couldn't make it all the way there and back in a single day, so the bargemen had to put in an overnight stay on the canal at a place with excellent local inns conveniently adjacent to the campsite. It's known as Paper Mill Lock, and I'm going to stick my neck out here and suggest that it may be because there was a big paper mill on the next island down the stream. But of course, it was important to the bargemen because this was the halfway point on the navigation, and this is where they bunk up for the night. In this place here, this is actually a bothy, good old Scottish word meaning a place where workmen who are on the road, drovers or itinerants of any sort, would bunk up for the night, literally in this case, because there were 8 to 10 men would sleep in here, and the only way you get them in a place that small is bunking them up. And they had stables on that side of the river with another bothy next door to it, and they'll tell you that this was for the Chelmsford men who were very particular about who they shared a room with, and the visiting side used to have the one next to the stables on that side of the canal. The main company, in fact the last to use the navigation, Brown and Sons, retired the horses, accountants eh, no soul, and introduced modern horsepower. And talking of introductions, I think it's time we met Susan, the subject of that riddle. And this is Susan, and these are the poor besotted souls that come down every Saturday morning to see to her needs.
That's right.
Susan is the sole survivor of the wooden barges that were purpose-built for this canal. At 48, she's still the darling and delight of members of the Chelmer Lighter Preservation Society. It was said I was a wind-up merchant. Am I allowed to?
Yeah, of course. You just be careful of that chain, you know.
Okay.
Keep well clear of that. You can do the... You've got to get a fair speed on it. once the engine fires, then the flywheel will go round and this will freewheel.
Susan's inboard engine and twin rudder system weren't ideally suited to this weed-ridden waterway, and the day came when she was replaced, just like the horses. Today, sadly, there's just too much floodwater in the canal, so Susan won't be venturing out. But I've finally mastered the steering on my barge, and I'm not going to let it stop me. Now here's one of history's little ironies. This canal transported the materials that were used to build the Great Eastern Railway. The same railway that slowly throttled the life out of the canal, just like road haulage companies did to the railways. Funny old world, innit? What do you think might be the connection between Liverpool Street Station, Wilkins, Winkles, and the windy old Blackwater estuary? I'll tell you the answer after the break. In the meantime, I'm going to eat these Winkles. No, I'm not. Now, what is Malden famous for? Well, the culinary experts amongst you will know that it's famous for sea salt, has been since Roman times, which brings us on to the historians. They'll tell you that it's famous for the Battle of Malden, when the visiting Vikings slaughtered the Saxons. It's famous amongst the nautical sort for the fact that in summer the place is awash with East Coast barges. But it's also famous for one other thing. Any ideas? Now, Malden wasn't just a dockland mooring for barges. In its day, it was a noted bathing resort. Yes, it was. Okay, I admit I thought that this was a rather grandiose boating lake too, but in fact it's Malden's effort to compete with the neighbouring seaside resorts of Southend and Clacton. In the early 1900s, this was a crowded beach complete with bathing machines. They'd built a dam and created Marine Lake, the largest saltwater lido in Britain, they'll try to tell you. But between you and me, they've obviously never seen the lido on Plymouth Hoe. Over at Tollesbury, everything seems slumped down into the muddy salt marsh, but these tall, strangely elegant wooden buildings aren't having any of that. They stand proud of their surroundings, and they've every reason to. These were the sail stores of a top-class racing yacht belonging to Sir Thomas Sopwith, a yacht crewed by Tollesbury sailors when he represented Britain in the America's Cup back in the 1900s. The Tollesbury Wick mud and saltwater marshes mightn't sound that attractive, but like most East Coast saltings, the cold clarity of the light is simply spectacular. So it's time to enlighten you about that riddle. Remember? The one about the connection between Liverpool Street Station, Wilkins, Winkles, and the windswept Blackwater estuary. Well, here's the answer. In the 1890s, the people in this part of the world decided it would be a great idea if they could persuade the Great Eastern Railway to build a branch line over here. That way, they could send out all their local produce to the ready markets down in London. Well, GER thought that was a splendid idea, and in the space of 2 years, they built the branch line. They built a station just on the other side of this bank here. They even built a pier going out into the Blackwater. That was very important because a lot of the produce was coming from there. The crabs and the winkles from the estuary. That's why it became known in time as the Crab and Winkle Line. But where does the Wilkins connection come in? Well, oh, it's upside down. It's Wilkins jam from Tiptree. That was the other major item that was sent up to the capital. Well, the Crab and Winkle line, sadly, has long since gone. But the jams are still going strong. And I tell you something, hell of a sight nicer than Winkles. Aha, you're thinking I've forgotten all about the Liverpool Street Station bit. Well, I haven't. Liverpool Street Station was just the other end of the railway line. The end of the line came to Tollsbury too in time. Sadly, the pier was dismantled in the Second World War. No point in presenting invading troops with a fully functioning pier, Captain Mannering. And in 1951, the little branch line went the way of all branch lines and was closed down. All that's left are a few photos and the tide-twisted skeleton of the structure that once stood here. And every tide that washes over it carries it further away from people's memories. Yeah, I must oil them, mustn't I? This lovely part of the Essex coast was known in Roman times as Flius Indumanum. Nowadays, it's Osey Island. And just like the island and the causeway further along the Blackwater, that was made famous in 991 when Brythnoth, the Saxon ealdorman, led his troops onto the causeway and had his head chopped off by the Vikings for his troubles. This place was concerned with invaders along this shoreline, but a long time before, the Romans probably used Osey Island as a small part of the defences of the Saxon shore. Much good it did them in the long run. Well, this place has had a varied history over the centuries, but the riddle I've got for you is more to do with its more recent history. OK, what's the connection, do you suppose, between Osey Island, bottles of beer, and bouncing boats? Osey Island must be a stunning place to live. Mind you, it's got one little drawback. Your driveway disappears twice a day. You see, there are only 4 hours in any tide when you can get across, which, if I'm honest, quite appeals to the Celtic side of my soul. Isolated islands far from the madding crowd, but with a decent deli just down the coast, you know? So really, there were wallabies on the island?
Yes, there were. But, not only that, I think...
Now, David Cole owns the island, but if you want to know about its former owners, he's still the man to ask. Frederick Charrington was part of the wealthy Victorian brewing empire, but he turned his back on the trade that had made his family's fortune and came to live here on Osey Island, where he set up a teetotal colony. What was it Frederick tried to do on the island?
He wanted to fight a battle against drink and drunkenness. Although he had the working class in mind originally, it turned out to be a very upper class establishment.
Really?
Yes, and so he thought he would be able to convert yachtsmen. He thought there would be a substantial demand for houses here from teetotal yachtsmen.
He's got no chance of getting yachtsmen off their grog.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a total failure.
So this was a fully temperance island. I mean, absolutely no alcohol at all.
There was none at all. And the part of it that worked was the upper class drying out establishment in Rivermere, and these chaps were not allowed anything at all. And but there was really quite a substantial smuggling trade, which you might have heard about. All the local fishermen were out here dead of night, and they would bury things or tie them to the doctor boy outside the captain's house and so on.
Oh, yes.
So they did manage to get something.
Charrington was obviously, like a lot of Victorians, caught up in this idea of doing good works, although that sounds patronising to our ear. I mean, what we call it was good old-fashioned welfare work, wasn't it? Social welfare.
I think he was a very, very decent, generous-minded man. Down here, he built this building not with his own money, but with subscribed money. And this was supposed to be not a drying out place, but a convalescent home for poor children of the East End. So that was purely philanthropic. But he also built a beautiful paddle steamer called Annie, which ran up and down the river. And this was for the working class of the East End of London, who were his customer base in former times. And they would go as far as Clacton and back. And then he had the menagerie here, which was with the wallabies, in behind the cottage. That was the cottage he used when he...
I love the thought of whatever the collective noun is for wallabies, a herd of wallabies bouncing round Osey Island. Now, for all the unusual history that Fred bestowed on the island, fate wasn't to be outdone. She decided that a teetotal island was their perfect place to house an organisation famed for its sobriety and temperance, the Royal Navy. In 1914, 2,000 sailors arrived on Osey Island. They quickly covered the place in slipways, workshops and barrack blocks because the Admiralty had a cunning plan. Develop a new type of fast torpedo boat with a special figure-of-8 propeller which would literally baffle the enemy's underwater hydrophones, a boat so quiet that it could arrive undetected on the Hun's doorstep, and, here's the cunning bit, it could move so fast and high through the water that it would simply jump the enemy's defence booms, leaving the Kaiser's high seas fleet slack-jawed in wonder and dismay. Once we're inside the enemy's harbour, we'll loose off our torpedoes, come about, and be home in time for toasted tea cakes and hot toddy. Sorry, hot toddy. Today, all that's left of the operation that paved the way for the famous motor torpedo boats of the Second War are a clutch of dilapidated sheds and a tangle of rusting rails and slipways. And that's how Charrington's beer and boom-jumping boats came together on Osey Island. Just time, the last post. And one more bit of history, not the fact that it's a GR postbox, but this bit, look at that, according to the tide. Next week, I'll be shedding light on the Fens. They decide not to let me loose on a Harley. They get a sensible driver instead, and I'm well and truly up the creek when I fail to keep my hands on my little ball of yarn. I buggered up this shot.